This is Nightmare Crypt. I don't tell these stories to entertain you. I tell them because some things don't stay buried, and because pretending they didn't happen only makes them come back louder. If you're listening to this late at night, alone, you should probably turn on a light. What I'm about to say isn't a story in the way you want it to be. It's a confession, and it's a warning. I'm not writing this because I want forgiveness. I'm writing it because pretending it didn't happen hasn't worked, and because whatever followed me out of that place is still close enough that I can feel it when the room goes quiet. I don't know how much time I have before it finds a way to finish what it started. If you've ever stayed somewhere old and felt watched for no reason, if you've ever heard footsteps that stopped when you stopped listening, then you need to take this seriously, because I did everything right. I didn't mess with rituals or trespass where I wasn't allowed, and it still happened. Something irreversible happened to me in that building. Something that doesn't leave marks you can photograph. I'm not the same person who walked in, and I don't think I ever walked out completely. I moved to northern New Mexico 3 years ago after my divorce finalized. Nothing dramatic. No cheating, no screaming fights, just two people who ran out of reasons to keep pretending. I wanted quiet, distance, and something cheap enough that I didn't feel like I was bleeding money every month just to exist. That's how I ended up taking a caretaker job for a retreat property outside of Taos. Technically it used to be a monastery, but that word had been sanded down in all the paperwork. Former religious residence, historic property, minimal occupancy. It was remote, dry, and surrounded by scrubland and rock. The kind of place where the wind never stops moving, even when everything else is still. My job was simple: keep the utilities running, make sure no one vandalized the place, let in the occasional historian or surveyor. Most weeks I was alone. The building itself was a long, rectangular structure made of thick adobe walls that smelled faintly like dust and old stone, no matter how much you cleaned. The rooms were narrow, the ceilings were low. Sound didn't echo the way it should. It felt swallowed. I slept in what used to be an administrative wing that had been renovated sometime in the 90s. Newer wiring, modern bathroom, everything else stayed mostly untouched. Long hallways, identical doors, faded religious artwork that no one bothered removing. The first few weeks were quiet, peaceful even. I drank my coffee on the back steps every morning, listened to the wind drag itself through the brush, and told myself I was healing. That's when I started noticing the footsteps. At first I blamed the building. Old structures shift, temperature changes, wood settles, except this place didn't have much wood. Mostly stone, adobe, things that shouldn't sound like shoes on tile. It always happened at night, always after midnight, always just outside the room I was in. Slow, deliberate, one step at a time. I told myself it was my imagination, amplified by the isolation. I'd been sleeping badly since the move anyway. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing, waiting for sleep that didn't come. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door and check the hallway, there was never anything there. No shadows, no movement, just the smell of cold air and dust. I started keeping a log, mostly to reassure myself. Wrote down times, weather, what I'd eaten. I needed patterns, needed something that said this was just stress doing what stress does. The log didn't help, because the times were too consistent. 12:17 a.m., 12:19 a.m., 12:18 a.m., always within a minute or two, and always stopping right outside my door. The first time I saw him, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was early morning, just after sunrise. The light in that part of the desert is sharp and unforgiving, like it's trying to expose something. I was walking the perimeter, checking a section of fencing that kept hikers from wandering too close to the building. That's when I noticed someone standing near the far wall of the old chapel wing. He was facing the building, not me. Tall, still, wearing dark clothing that didn't move in the wind. For half a second I felt relief. Another human being, someone real. I called out, asked if he needed help. He didn't turn around. I walked closer, feeling annoyed now. Trespassers weren't common, but they happened. When I got close enough to see details, my stomach tightened. The clothing wasn't modern, it wasn't theatrical either, just old, plain, a long dark robe tied at the waist with something that looked like rope. No markings, no symbols, no cross. His head was shaved. I asked him again if he was lost. He turned slowly, and I remember thinking how wrong that movement felt. Like he was making sure every part of him obeyed. His face was pale and narrow, not sickly, just drained. His eyes weren't empty or glowing or anything dramatic. They were focused, intent, like he was studying me. He opened his mouth like he was going to speak, then closed it again. I didn't wait. I told him he needed to leave the property and started reaching for my phone. That's when he raised one finger to his lips. Not aggressively, not threatening, just a quiet request. The sound that came out of his throat wasn't a word. It wasn't even a sound I recognized, more like air passing through something dry. Then he stepped backward, straight into the shadow of the building, and disappeared around the corner. I ran after him. I'm not proud of that. Curiosity beat common sense. By the time I reached the corner, there was nothing there. No footprints, no movement. Just blank wall and sunlight. That night, the footsteps came closer. They didn't stop outside my door. They stopped right beside my bed. I lay there, frozen, staring into the dark, listening to breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, controlled, patient. I didn't sleep at all. A few days later, I found the door to the old chapel open. I know I locked it. I always locked it. The chapel was the one place management specifically told me not to use. Structural issues, liability, history they didn't want disturbed. The door stood open just enough to let a thin line of darkness spill into the hallway. The smell hit me first. Old incense, dust, something metallic underneath. I should have closed it and walked away. I didn't. Inside, the chapel was stripped bare. No pews, no altar. Just a long, empty room with stained stone floors and narrow windows that barely let in light. And footprints. Bare footprints. They led from the center of the room to the back wall and stopped. That night, I dreamed I was kneeling. I don't remember lowering myself. I just remember the pressure in my knees and the ache in my back. The floor was cold. Someone was standing behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of their body. I tried to turn around, hands pressed down on my shoulders, gentle but unyielding. A voice whispered something I didn't understand. When I woke up, my knees hurt. Actually hurt. Bruised. That was when I started drinking at night just to sleep. 1 or 2 glasses turned into more. It dulled the edges but made the waiting worse. If you're still listening at this point, do me one favor. Subscribe to Nightmare Crypt. Not because I care about numbers, but because people disappear into silence when no one's paying attention. And attention is the only thing that keeps stories like this from getting buried again. The monks started appearing everywhere. Not always clearly. Sometimes just a shape in the corner of my vision. Sometimes a reflection where he shouldn't be. Once I saw him standing at the end of the hallway, perfectly still, while I was wide awake, sober, and staring straight at him. I blinked. He was closer. I backed into my room and slammed the door, locked it, pushed furniture against it like that meant anything. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, breathing through my mouth so I wouldn't make noise. The handle turned, slowly. It stopped, then turned again, harder this time. Not frantic, not angry, patient. No retreat, just silence. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, morning came. The door was untouched. No marks, no damage. That was the worst part, how reasonable it all looked in daylight. I tried to leave the property that afternoon, packed a bag, threw my logbook in the truck. The engine turned over, then died. Battery was fine. Gas tank full. Everything looked normal. When I opened the hood, there was dirt packed into the engine block. Hand-packed. Deliberate. That was when I realized I wasn't in control anymore. That night, the chanting started. Low, rhythmic, coming from inside the walls. Not loud enough to record. Not clear enough to understand. Just enough to let me know it was meant for me. I didn't sleep. I don't think I ever really have since. By the 4th night without real sleep, my thoughts started slipping. Not hallucinations. Nothing that clean. It felt more like my brain was lagging a half second behind reality. I'd reach for a cup and my hand would miss. I'd read the same sentence 3 times, and still not know what it said. My own reflection startled me. The chanting didn't come every night. That made it worse. When it didn't happen, I lay there waiting for it, listening so hard my ears rang. When it did happen, it was always different. Sometimes closer, sometimes muffled, like it was coming from underground. Once it sounded like it was right behind my head, whispering into the pillow. I tried recording it with my phone. Every morning I'd check the audio. Nothing. Just static. My breathing, the hum of the building. That was when I noticed something else. The logbook I'd been keeping, the one with the times and notes and rational explanations, had new entries I didn't remember writing. No timestamps. Remain still. Do not turn. Kneel. My handwriting. Same pressure. Same slant. I stopped using the logbook after that. I shoved it into a drawer and taped it shut like that mattered. On the 6th night, I woke up standing. Not walking, not moving. Standing in the hallway. Barefoot. Cold floor under my feet. The lights were off, but the building wasn't dark. Moonlight came in through the narrow windows, laying long, pale rectangles across the walls. I was facing the chapel. My heart was beating so hard, it made my ears throb. I tried to move my legs. Nothing happened. I tried to speak. My throat locked. I wasn't frozen with fear. It felt more like I'd been paused. From the far end of the hallway, I heard the sound of fabric shifting. Slow footsteps approached. Not hiding anymore. No pretense of absence. He stopped a few feet away from me. I could see him clearly now. The monk. The robe hung loose on his frame, the fabric worn thin in places. His feet were bare and dirty. His hands were clasped in front of him like he was waiting. He smelled like dust and old sweat and something faintly sour. He tilted his head, studying me. Then very gently he reached out and placed 2 fingers against my forehead. The pressure was light, almost affectionate. The moment he touched me, my knees buckled. I dropped hard onto the floor, the pain sharp and immediate. The sound echoed down the hallway, loud enough that it should have woken the dead. He didn't flinch. He stepped past me and walked into the chapel. I could move again. I didn't follow him. I crawled back to my room, slammed the door, and threw up into the trash can until my throat burned. I sat on the floor shaking, arms wrapped around myself, whispering out loud just to hear another human voice. Morning didn't make it better. I found marks on my forehead. Not bruises, redness. 2 faint lines that faded by noon. That afternoon, a surveyor showed up unannounced. Management hadn't told me anyone was coming. He was middle-aged, friendly, wore mirrored sunglasses. The most normal thing I'd seen in weeks. He asked if I'd noticed any structural shifts in the chapel wing. I told him not to go in there. He laughed it off and said it was his job. I watched him walk down the hallway. I watched him open the chapel door. I listened to him scream. It wasn't a horror movie scream. No drawn-out theatrics. Just raw panic tearing out of his chest. He ran back into the hallway, tripped, slammed into the wall. His glasses were gone. His eyes were wild. "There's someone in there," he kept saying. "There's someone. He won't stop looking at me." I grabbed him and tried to pull him toward the exit. He resisted, digging his heels in like a child. "He's not moving," he whispered. "He's not breathing." When I turned to look down the hallway, the monk stood at the chapel entrance. Still, calm. The surveyor saw him too. I know he did. His body went rigid, his mouth opened and nothing came out. The monk raised his hand. The surveyor dropped to his knees. I dragged the surveyor with me, half carrying him through the building, out into the sunlight. He sobbed the whole way, begging me not to let him go back inside. We made it to his truck. I shoved him into the driver's seat and told him to leave, to not come back, to tell management the place was unsafe. He didn't argue. He peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying everywhere. I stood there watching until the dust settled. When I turned back toward the building, the monk was gone. That night, the chanting became words. Not English, not anything I recognized, but the cadence was clear, instructional, repetitive. I pressed my hands over my ears until they hurt. It didn't matter. At some point the chanting stopped, and the silence felt worse. I felt eyes on me. I knew where he was without seeing him. Behind me. I didn't turn around. I stayed very still. I remembered the note, "Do not turn." A hand rested on my shoulder, not gripping, not threatening, claiming. I passed out. I woke up in the chapel. The floor was freezing. My cheek pressed against stone. The smell was stronger here. Incense, metal, something rotten underneath. Candles lined the walls, not new ones. Half-melted stubs placed carefully in shallow grooves carved into the stone. I hadn't seen those grooves before. The monk stood at the far end of the room, facing me. Between us, carved into the floor, was a symbol I didn't understand. Not religious. Just lines intersecting at wrong angles, dug deep enough that dust and dark residue filled the grooves. My wrists hurt. I looked down and saw rope binding them behind my back. Real rope, rough, tight enough to cut circulation. Panic hit all at once. Full body animal panic. I kicked and twisted, scraping my skin raw against the stone. The rope didn't budge. The monk began to walk toward me. Each step echoed. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might black out again. I screamed. I didn't care how it sounded. I begged. I swore. I promised anything. He stopped a foot away from my head. He crouched down so we were eye level. Up close, his skin was cracked around the lips. His eyes were bloodshot but steady, focused. There was no anger in them, no pleasure. He opened his mouth. This time, words came out. Soft, broken. Like he hadn't used them in a long time. Stillness, he said. The word landed like a command. My body went slack. I was aware of everything. Every breath, every sensation. But I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Couldn't close my eyes. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small blunt blade. Not ceremonial. Practical. Stained. He placed it against my chest. Right over my heart. I felt the pressure increase. And then, nothing. No pain, no cut. He withdrew the blade and pressed his palm flat against my chest instead. Something shifted inside me. Not physically. Deeper than that, like a switch flipping. I felt empty, hollowed. The monk leaned in close, his forehead touching mine. I smelled his breath. Old, dry. "You will keep it," he whispered. Then the candles went out all at once. I woke up in my room. Morning light streamed through the window. The rope was gone. No marks on my wrists. No blood. No blade. But my chest felt wrong. Heavy. Like something was resting there that didn't belong. I quit the job that day. I didn't explain. I didn't go back for my things. I drove until the building was a smear in the rearview mirror. I thought leaving would end it. I was wrong. I made it to Albuquerque before the shaking got bad enough that I had to pull over. It started in my hands. Not tremors, pressure. Like I was gripping something too tightly without realizing it. When I opened my fingers, they stayed curled for a second before relaxing. My chest ached with every breath, a dull weight that didn't move when I shifted positions. I told myself it was adrenaline, shock, sleep deprivation catching up. I checked into a cheap hotel near the interstate, the kind with buzzing lights and thin walls where you can hear toilets flush 3 rooms away. I wanted noise. Proof that I was back in the real world. That night, I dreamed I was standing again. Not in the monastery, in the motel room, facing the bathroom mirror. In the reflection behind me, the monk stood perfectly still. I woke up screaming. The clerk threatened to call the police if I kept it up. I apologized until my throat hurt. I didn't sleep again. Over the next few days, things started slipping. I'd catch myself kneeling without remembering lowering myself. Once in the shower, once beside the bed, once in the middle of a grocery store aisle, my knees pressed into dirty tile while shoppers stared. Every time it happened, I felt calm, empty. The panic came later, after. I started hearing the chanting again, but now it wasn't coming from walls. It was inside my chest. Not words, rhythm, a pulse that didn't match my heartbeat. I went to an urgent care clinic. told them I was having dissociative episodes. Left out the monk, left out the chapel. They gave me a pamphlet and a prescription that didn't touch whatever was happening. The monk didn't appear every night anymore. He didn't need to. I felt him when rooms went quiet, when lights dimmed, when people stopped talking and the world paused between moments. That pressure in my chest would deepen, like something leaning forward, listening. The first time I realized I wasn't alone inside myself, I was brushing my teeth. I caught my reflection smiling. I wasn't. My face was slack, exhausted. But the smile was there, faint and wrong, pulling at the corners of my mouth. I dropped the toothbrush and staggered back. The smile faded slowly, reluctantly. That was the moment I understood what "you will keep it" meant. He hadn't followed me. He'd stayed. I really did. I set alarms to keep myself grounded. Timers, notes. I talked out loud constantly, narrating what I was doing like that would anchor me. I avoided silence, slept with the TV on, slept sitting up, slept with the lights blazing. It didn't matter. Stillness found me anyway. Sometimes I'd lose hours. I'd come back standing somewhere unfamiliar. Parks, empty churches, public restrooms, with dirt on my knees, and that hollow calm settling in my chest like a held breath. Once I woke up kneeling in front of my apartment door, my forehead pressed against the wood. I don't remember walking there. The neighbors stopped making eye contact. The monk began to whisper instructions. Not often, not clearly, just enough to guide. When I resisted, the pressure increased. Migraine so bad I vomited. Chest pain that sent me to the ER twice. They ran tests. Found nothing. I learned something important during those weeks. The monk didn't punish disobedience. He waited it out. Waiting was his strength. The moment of pure panic came when I realized I could no longer tell which thoughts were mine. I'd think about kneeling before I even noticed the urge. I'd feel relief at the idea of stillness, and that relief terrified me more than the fear ever did. The paralyzing dread came the first time I heard him speak through me. I was on the phone with my sister. She was worried. I'd been avoiding her calls. She asked me if I was okay. I opened my mouth to lie. What came out wasn't my voice. It was softer, slower. "Remain still," it said. She hung up screaming. I don't blame her. After that, I isolated completely. No calls, no messages, no mirrors if I could help it. I lived in a half-dark apartment, with the curtains drawn, counting my breaths, trying to stay ahead of the quiet. But the quiet always won. The moment I realized I was not in control came one night when I tried to leave my apartment, to check myself into a hospital. I made it to the front door. My hand rested on the knob, and my body knelt. Not violently, not suddenly, gently, like this was the most natural thing in the world. I stayed there for hours, forehead pressed to the door, breathing slow and even while my mind screamed. When I finally stood, it wasn't because I chose to. It was because I'd been allowed to. I don't remember deciding to go back. I just remember driving. The desert stretched out ahead of me, familiar and wrong. My hands didn't shake this time. My chest felt full, purposeful. When the monastery came into view, my heart slowed. The building looked the same. Patient, the chapel door was already open. Inside, the candles were lit. The monk waited at the far end of the room. I didn't panic. That's the worst part. I walked to the center of the floor and knelt where the symbol had been carved. The grooves were deeper now, darker. He approached and stopped in front of me. I looked up at him. For the first time, I felt something close to relief. He placed his hands on my shoulders, just like before. This time, he didn't say stillness. He didn't need to. I felt myself recede, like stepping backward into a dark room. Not disappearing, just making space. The last thing I remember clearly is his face inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. Then, everything went quiet. I don't know how long I was gone. I woke up 3 days later in my apartment, filthy and dehydrated, with dirt under my nails, and bruises on my knees so deep they turned yellow before they faded. The pressure in my chest was worse. He's not always here anymore, but when the world goes still, when sound drops away and waiting sets in, I feel him lean forward inside me, listening. I'm telling this now because I don't know how much longer I'll be able to choose my words, because writing is harder every day, because sometimes I catch myself hoping for the quiet. If you ever find yourself somewhere old and empty, and the silence feels patient, leave. If you hear footsteps that stop when you listen, don't investigate. And if you ever feel relief at the thought of kneeling, of giving up control, of becoming still, run. Because once something like that is kept, it doesn't stay contained.